Hello everyone and welcome to my The Bold and Beautiful Always channel. She is your daughter. Nick gives Ridge a DNA bombshell. A world removed from the sun-drenched drama of Forrester Creations, the sterile, humming tension of the Los Angeles Memorial ICU felt like the center of the universe. Outside the glass-walled chamber, Ridge Forrester stood still, his face carved with a primordial horror that no boardroom struggle had ever stirred. Inside, his youngest son, RJ, lay in the clinical, frigid illumination of the monitors. Beneath a maze of cables and tubes, Forrester was pallid and eerily motionless. They were brought here by a bizarre scaffolding collapse that occurred during a photo session at Forrester Creations, which was a frenzied blur of splintering wood, frightened shouts, and RJ's horribly limp form descending. The severe internal injuries had been stabilized after hours of surgery, but the devastating blood loss had forced RJ into a severe case of hypovolemia. He needed blood now, lingering in the painful limbo between life and death. Immediately. Enormous quantities. Ridge, a parent who would have been happy to tear out his own heart, was rendered useless. He should have had the ideal blood type, O-negative, the universal donor. However, the preliminary cross-match was unsuccessful. Amazingly. Agranulocytosis. An uncommon, disastrous response that pointed to a basic incompatibility Ridge was unable to understand. He had yelled at the hematologist, "It's impossible," in a voice racked with shock and incredulity. "He's my son. Run it again." The second test verified that Ridge's blood was poisoned to RJ's severely damaged system. RJ's distressed mother, Brooke, was AB positive, meaning she was useless. Hope's type wasn't compatible, Steffi was in Paris, and Thomas was just Thomas. RJ was being let down by the Forrester family, which was so influential in business. When he most needed it. The air was thick with desperation. Physicians fumbled, their gazes flitting to the ticking clock. Ridge watched the numbers on RJ's monitor drop dangerously low while pressing his forehead against the cold glass and making fervent prayers to a God he seldom ever recognized. His son's every ragged breath felt like a countdown to an unimaginable abyss. Nick Marone plunged into this oppressive nightmare. Although he was no longer related to them by blood or marriage, word of the accident had quickly spread around their little community. He had come for RJ, the child he had watched grow up and who had always treated him with simple kindness, not because he still harbored feelings for Brooke or Ridge. He witnessed Brooke's tearful face, Ridge's destruction, and the medical staff's frenetic energy. Nick's own blood type, O-negative, the universal donor, flashed across his memory as he overheard the tense, frightened conference: massive transfusion needed, father incompatible, mother incompatible, searching regional banks but O-negative reserves are critically low, time is the enemy. Simple human decency gave rise to an impulse. He stepped up and said, "I'm O-negative," his voice breaking the tension. "Take what he needs." A look of relief crossed the hematologist's face. "Mr. Marone? Are you certain? We'll need a quick confirmatory test, but if you're willing." Nick firmly responded, "Anything," and he was already pulling his sleeve up. He looked away from Ridge, instead concentrating on the phlebotomist who was carrying a tray. The blood draw was quick and easy. Nick had a strange sense of purpose as he saw his dark blood fill the tubes. He wasn't trying to save RJ. He was doing it for RJ, not for Brooke or Ridge. For a period. Before the transfusion could start, the sample was taken away for the quick cross-match. At last, Ridge gave him a look that was a complicated blend of reluctance to be grateful and unguarded vulnerability. The words were thick and forced, but they were unquestionably sincere. "Nick, thank you. It was painful to wait." Hours passed in the span of minutes. Ridge paced like an animal in a cage. With her knuckles white, Brooke prayed in silence. Nick watched the controlled turmoil from a stoic stance close to the nurse's station. The hematologist then came out of the laboratory with one piece of paper in her hand. His look was one of profound, perplexed bewilderment rather than relief. His brow furrowed as though he were trying to solve an impossible problem. He glanced from the paper to Nick and then to Ridge. "Mr. Marone," the physician said, his voice wavering. "The cross-match." Nick stiffened. "Incompatible? But I'm O-neg, universal donor. It should be." "It's not incompatible, Mr. Marone," the doctor said in a very quiet, amazed voice. It's perfect. Beyond perfect. The match, it's phenotypically identical. Like father and son." Quiet. There was complete, deafening silence in the intensive care unit hallway. The faraway pages, the rustle of scrubs, and the sound of machines all vanished into thin air. Ridge snapped his head in the direction of the doctor and stopped pacing in the middle of his stride. Tearful prayers froze on Brooks' lips. Nick gazed in complete confusion. "Father and what? That's impossible. RJ is Ridge's son." The hematologist held out the report as if it were radioactive and shook his head slowly. "Genetically speaking, Mr. Forrester, based on the markers we test for transfusion compatibility, you cannot be RJ's biological father. The incompatibility reaction wasn't just bad luck, it's genetically impossible for you to be his parent." "But Mr. Marone." He looked at Nick with wide eyes of scientific amazement. "His markers, they align perfectly with RJ's. This level of match, it's statistically indicative of direct paternity." Time paused. Ridge's face turned white, then pale. He made a startling step back and thumped into the wall. His wide, unfathomable horror-filled eyes were fixed on Nick. "No," he said in a barely perceptible whisper. "No. That's insane. RJ is mine." "Brooke," he said, turning to face his wife in a desperate attempt to get confirmation, denial, or anything else. Brooke's hand flew to her mouth, and she appeared completely broken. "Ridge. Long-buried memories came flooding back to her, a time of terrible separation from Ridge years ago, brought on by one of their innumerable betrayals, a time of extreme loneliness and hopelessness. A moment when Nick Marone had been her confidant, her loyal friend, and, in a moment of mutual vulnerability and tremendous hurt, more. Just one night. RJ's following delivery, which felt like a miracle linking her and Ridge back together, was a mistake hidden beneath layers of reconciliation, renewed vows, and incredible delight. She had never questioned. Never. Right up till now. Her face was devoid of color. "Oh my God," was spoken in a cry of sheer fear. Nick remained still. "Father and son," the doctor said, echoing in his brain. "Ridge is genetically impossible. Ideal fit for you." He gazed at Brooke's broken face and the horrible realization that was beginning to dawn in her eyes. Ridge, the adversary who always seemed to win Brooke back, the entitled heir, the serial husband, he was everything Nick wasn't. Then he saw RJ struggling for his life through the glass. He had always liked the boy. The child whose effortless smile made him think of who? Not Ridge. Never go to Ridge. Little details suddenly fell into place. RJ's dislike of extreme sports, unlike Ridge's adventurous history, his subdued creative sensibility, very unlike Ridge's aggressive design style, and the way he occasionally cocked his head, a move Nick recognized as being his own. Nick was struck by the unavoidable and terrible truth like a goods train. Years spent observing RJ grow, years of courteous detachment, years of thinking he was just Ridge's son, all of that was erased in a single moment. Ridge watched Nick's face light up with understanding. Witnessed the shock change into something else, a deep, visceral bond with the youngster battling behind the glass. Ridge's entire world fell apart, and he was already on the verge of losing his son. His identity's cornerstones, his marriage, his fatherhood, and his heritage, fell to dust. No! The cry echoed down the sterile hallway as it ripped from his throat, primal and raw. His eyes were burning with a mix of volcanic rage and heartbreak as he lunged forward, grabbing Nick's shirt front instead of the doctor. The words, "You lying bastard. What did you do? When? How?" escaped his mouth. Nick didn't recoil. Instead of responding to Ridge's rage with violence, he displayed a fearful, melancholy composure. The jolt had solidified into a harsh, icy certainty. He saw the face of the boy who was, for some reason, his own flesh and blood, the doctor's indisputable science, and Brooke's silent affirmation. Rage wasn't pushed away by him. He merely put his hand over Ridge's fist, which was gripping his shirt, and spoke in a low, terrible tone that sliced like a scalpel through Ridge's roar. "She's your daughter." Nick tells Ridge the shocking truth about her DNA. Ridge's hold relaxed, his rage fading into pure, unadulterated disbelief as the words lingered in the air, a 5-word nuclear bomb. He staggered back, letting go of Nick's shirt, his face a mask of complete incomprehension. "My daughter?" He looked furiously from Nick to Brooke and rasped, "What are you?" Not letting him finish, Nick stepped forward, his eyes fixed on Ridge's, and poured into his next words a lifetime of being the runner-up, the consolation prize, the man Brooke decided to settle for after Ridge broke her heart. His voice was full of emotion, not triumph, but a deep, painful realization combined with a fierce, newfound protectiveness. "No, Ridge. Not my daughter." He paused, letting the emphasis sink in, the pronoun shifting the axis of their world. His finger stabbed towards the ICU window, towards RJ. "He's your son?" It was an acrid condemnation of a query. "Biologically? In terms of genetics?" He shook his head slowly, the movement heavy with the weight of shattered history. "Look at the science. Examine Brooke's face." "He's not your son, Ridge," Nick said, his voice rough with a sudden, overpowering surge of paternal love he never knew he possessed. "That boy in there, fighting for his life with my blood flowing into his veins." Nick's eyes welled with unexpected and fierce tears. "He never was." He took a shuddering breath, the final words landing with the finality of a tombstone sealing shut, "RJ is mine." The silence that followed was absolute. Not a hum, not a beep, not a breath seemed to exist. Ridge stood as if poleaxed, every molecule of his being rejecting the words while the horrific, logical truth of the blood tests and Brooke's devastated silence confirmed them. His legs gave way. He slid down the wall, collapsing onto the cold linoleum floor, a broken man staring blankly ahead, the image of RJ, Nick's son, burning into his retinas. Brooke sank to her knees beside him, sobs racking her body, her hands covering her face, the architect of this unimaginable destruction. Nick turned away from them, his own tears falling freely now, but his gaze was fixed solely on RJ through the glass. The transfusion lines were connected, his blood, the blood of RJ's true biological father, now the lifeline pumping into the boy's veins. The battle for RJ's physical survival continued, machines whirring, monitors blinking. But in the corridor, another battle had been irrevocably lost. Ridge Forrester's paternity, his legacy, his very understanding of his family, lay in ruins at Nick Marone's feet, obliterated by a DNA truth more shocking and destructive than any betrayal that had come before. The words "he's mine" echoed in the sterile air, not a claim of victory, but a devastating pronouncement of a 2-decade-long lie, and the terrifying dawn of a truth that would forever fracture the Forrester dynasty. The only sound, besides Brooke's weeping and Ridge's ragged, empty breathing, was the relentless, indifferent beep, 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 of RJ's heart monitor, marking time in a world suddenly, catastrophically, unrecognizable. The statement "my MLM told me before she died" shocks Eric. My MOM told me before she died. The words came out of Bridget's mouth like thunder crashing in a silent room, her voice trembling but defiant as she stood in Eric Forrester's study, tears threatening to spill from the corners of her eyes while her hands gripped the edge of his antique mahogany desk. And Eric, her father, the patriarch, the man who had always seemed untouchable in his strength and elegance, stood frozen across from her, his expression slackening into something unrecognizable. Disbelief, fear, heartbreak, and confusion all tangled together in one devastating silence that seemed to stretch across decades. Bridget had carried this secret for years, one she swore she'd never utter, one that her late mother, Stephanie Forrester, the iron-willed matriarch of their clan, had whispered to her on her deathbed with shaking fingers and a labored voice, begging her to keep it buried for the sake of the family's legacy. But now, watching Eric spiral in recent weeks from health scares and family tensions, watching him cling to old traditions and outdated loyalties while chaos bloomed around them, Bridget couldn't carry it anymore, not after what she had discovered about Ridge's true paternity, not after the blood test results she stumbled upon while reviewing old medical files stored at University Hospital under an anonymous code only she and Stephanie had known. She had tried to push it down, to rationalize it, to tell herself that secrets were part of this family's DNA, but when she confronted Donna about the inconsistencies in Ridge's recent health reports, his organ match issues, his unexplainable immunity markers, Donna, always sweet and evasive, couldn't lie convincingly enough, and it forced Bridget to pull out the one card she never wanted to play, the truth her mother had made her swear to keep. Ridge was not Eric's biological son, not really, not ever. And Stephanie had known it all along. Eric staggered back, his fingers gripping the back of a leather chair like it was the only thing anchoring him to the floor, his voice a dry whisper. "What did you say?" And Bridget's voice cracked as she repeated, slower this time, "Mom told me, before she died. She confessed everything. Ridge's real father isn't you. It's Massimo Marone," and Eric blinked like he'd been struck, his mind retreating to a time decades ago. Back when Stephanie had vanished for weeks under the pretense of caring for her sick mother in Chicago, and how she returned colder, more secretive, and more obsessed than ever with molding Ridge into a Forrester heir. The weight of every moment suddenly recontextualized, every argument, every look Stephanie gave him when Ridge disappointed him, every time she insisted Ridge was just like you, Eric, all of it was a mask. A carefully constructed illusion to protect not just the family name, but her own secrets. And Eric, breathless now, dropped into the chair behind him, his voice hollow. "I love that boy like he was mine," and Bridget nodded, swallowing her guilt. "You still love him like he's yours. And maybe that's all that should matter. But you have a right to know the truth. I kept it for as long as I could. But I can't keep watching you fight for a legacy that was built on lies you didn't even know were told." Eric's hands trembled in his lap, his mind racing through memories of holding Ridge as a newborn, of teaching him how to sketch, how to sew a hemline, how to behave like a gentleman and a leader, and it broke him, because none of that, apparently, was built on blood, only belief, and he didn't know whether to feel betrayed by Stephanie or betrayed by time itself. "Did Ridge know?" he asked quietly, and Bridget shook her head. "I don't think so. I think Mom told me because she couldn't bring herself to tell him, and she didn't want the secret to die with her in case he ever needed medical help, or there was ever a risk to the rest of the family." And Eric let out a strangled laugh, half bitter, half heartbroken. "Stephanie always had a contingency plan, didn't she?" And then the silence settled again, deeper now, heavier, as if the walls of the mansion itself had absorbed the truth and were mourning with him. Bridget sat across from him, her voice softer now, more like a daughter than a doctor. "Dad, this doesn't change who you are. Or who he is. But it does change how we move forward. With the company. With the estate. With our name." And Eric, weary beyond his years in that moment, nodded slowly, realizing how much more complicated things had just become. Not only would this revelation tear through the family if it ever came out, but it would also force them to re-examine the entire structure of Forrester Creations, its ownership, its legacy, and what it meant to be a Forrester at all. The irony wasn't lost on him that after all these years spent defending the family name, it might not have belonged to him in the way he believed, and yet, the love, the history, the time, it had belonged to him in the way that mattered most. Finally, As the fire in the hearth crackled gently behind them, Eric looked up at Bridget, his eyes red but resolute. "Thank you for telling me," and Bridget reached across the desk, placing her hand on his. "I wish I never had to," and for a long time, neither of them spoke. They just sat there, hand in hand, two generations of Forresters facing the weight of one woman's final confession, and the crumbling legacy it left in its wake.